Body and patrol car cameras are in the pipeline for the Jackson County Sheriff's Office. They've been on the wish list for years.
News 13's Rex Hodge explains how federal COVID money may be involved.
Number one priority is officer safety.
A combination of funding is leading to an opportunity for Jackson County to get body cameras on deputies and cameras in their patrol cars. County Commission Chair Brian McMahon says Jackson received $8.5 million in American Rescue Plan funding. He says the rules and how they can be used has evolved.
Now the federal government says if you're getting less than $10 million, you can use it for whatever you want to. But the simplest thing to use it for, in which most jurisdictions are using it for, is to supplant traditional governmental costs.
Things, McMahon says, like salaries, supplies.
We got things that were incurred during the COVID days that we can reimburse ourselves for, and that's what we're going to use the American Recovery Funds for.
It's all by the book, McMahon says.
And then that frees up general fund money that we can then set aside in a special fund that we can take care of projects that may not have been possible without having the recovery funds.
The financial latitude affording the opportunity to buy the body cameras and patrol car cameras for the first time in Jackson County.
Be a lot of transparency for the citizens.
And McMahon says accountability on the part of the officer.
Also gives us an opportunity to create a multi-source of information, evidence as to how calls transpire.
Plus, McMahon says the system, including dozens of cameras on officers and in their cars, producing data stored in one convenient location. He expects it won't be long for the equipment to arrive.
And masks will be optional in Buncombe County schools starting Monday.
That vote tonight follows many other school systems that have already moved on from masks being required.
News 13's Samir Nefsi has more.
Nearly a week after Governor Roy Cooper recommended the lifting of mask mandates across the state of North Carolina, the Board of Education for the Buncombe County Schools voting unanimously to make masking optional for both students and staff starting February 28th. It comes as COVID-19 metrics indicate a decrease in positivity rates.
All those in favor?
A roar of applause erupts as the Board of Education voted. After nearly 30 minutes of public discussion, not all on board with that decision.
There's a big difference in not having to wear a mask in the grocery store and not having to wear a mask in the classroom.
While the Ash family asked masking stay in place out of fear for the immunocompromised community.
In 2019, Hazel was diagnosed with leukemia. You're facing caution on one hand, which hurts nobody, or taking off masks, which has the potential to really hurt some children.
Hazel Ash making her own plea to the board.
I would like to keep on the mask because if we stop them, kids like me cannot go to school.
Other parents say it's time to ditch the mask policy.
Why do our children still have a mask mandate when the entirety of Buncombe County does not? What you're doing to our children is psychological warfare.
My youngest son started school during the pandemic. He has never experienced school without masks. He's never known the fun that he can have without having to socially distance or wear a mask.
In addition to public comment, 40 emails were sent to the Board of Education, 18 of which asked to keep masking in place, while 22 asked for the board to make masking optional. Superintendent Tony Baldwin reported 79 out of 115 public schools in the state have moved to optional masking over universal.
Here's our recommendations to the board. At beginning Monday, February 28th, that optional masking will be enacted at all Buncombe County schools.
Now, students will be required to mask up on school buses per federal guidelines. If staffers or students test positive for COVID-19, they'll still need to quarantine for 5 days and mask up for days 6 through 10 if they return to in-person learning. Superintendent Baldwin says they will evaluate COVID-19 metrics as needed, explaining they will revisit this policy when needed.
If you live here in the mountains or know our community is facing a crisis with homelessness.
At last check, Asheville recorded nearly 530 people living on the streets. This week, in a special 3-part series, News 13's Kristen Aguirre dives into what is creating this problem.
Tonight, she sits down with local experts and looks into how the lack of affordable housing is contributing.
Most of us are living paycheck to paycheck and are much closer to an experience of homelessness than we are to being a millionaire or a billionaire.
Jerry Kimbrough sees firsthand how quickly people can lose their home. He's the Rapid Rehousing Director at Homeward Bound, a local nonprofit that aims to end homelessness through permanent housing and support.
We truly believe housing is the solution to homelessness.
A tough solution for a growing city like Asheville.
Affordable housing is hard to come by in the Asheville-Buncombe County area. Typically there is about 1% or even less than 1% of affordable housing that is available to move into.
Because a growing city means a higher demand for housing, especially affordable housing.
Our housing specialists here at Homeward Bound typically cannot find an affordable unit that's under $1,000 a month now. So we've definitely seen rents increase over time, particularly over the last 5 to 10 years, I would say.
According to the North Carolina Housing Coalition, 30% of Buncombe County is cost burden. That's about 33,000 households, and it breaks down to this. 48% of renters, or about 19,075 people, and 20% of homeowners, or 13,691 people, all have difficulty affording their homes in Buncombe County.
There's just very limited affordable housing.
Right now, the income needed to afford a 2-bedroom apartment in Buncombe County is $51,160. That's according to the North Carolina Housing Coalition.
The housing market here is really limited, and so there's just a lot more hurdles to jump.
And if you can't make those jumps, you could end up on the streets.
We know from national data that the only known indicator of rates of homelessness in a community is housing cost.
Emily Ball has a bird's eye view of homelessness in our area. She's the Homeless Services Assistance Performance Lead for the City of Asheville.
The City of Asheville is the continuum of care lead, so really responsible for looking at homeless services within this continuum of care and making sure that we have the right mix of interventions. So we want to look at who our homeless population is, really be data-driven in that, and then develop strategies in response to that. Look at the interventions available in our community and see if those are the right mix of interventions that best meet the need for people who are experiencing homelessness.
She helps gather data for the annual point-in-time count.
We do an annual point-in-time count, which works just like a census. It's a single night count of everyone identified as homeless, collects demographic information, other household characteristics.
She says it's not perfect, but it's the data we have.
We're using the same data year after year, so we're conducting that count at the end of January every year. That gives us a picture of how homelessness changes in our community over time.
Last year, the count identified 527 people as homeless. 411 people were in emergency shelters or transitional housing, and 116 were outside camping, on the streets, or in a car. The unsheltered number nearly doubling from 2020 when it was 65.
In our community, housing costs have been increasing significantly. There's an increasing divide between wages and housing costs.
Ball saying data shows the majority of people who are homeless in our community are single adults.
When it gets really difficult for people to pay the rent, and they don't have that support system in place, that's when they can become homeless.
Which is why Jerry says we need more affordable permanent housing and a high access shelter, which means a shelter with limited barriers to access the space.
It really is a win to help end these folks' suffering and get them into housing and help keep them in housing. And it's also a way to help our community as a whole with folks who are struggling with folks living outside around their businesses or are concerned about the cost of homelessness to our community.
Right now, Homeward Bound is working on the Days In project, which will be a permanent supportive housing program. People will be able to lease a space to live there. Security and support services will be on site, helping guests stay stably housed.
The cost of housing folks is significantly less expensive than the cost of someone who is experiencing homelessness in our community when you take all of the emergency services into consideration.
Jerry saying this supportive housing model reduces emergency services costs like law enforcement and healthcare. It also helps guests sustain independence.
We know from national data that the only known indicator of rates of homelessness in a community is housing cost.
When we support the folks who are experiencing homelessness, when we support the folks that are struggling the most, we all benefit. I think we can all benefit from that collaboration.
Jerry saying Homeward Bound has used the same model for the Days In project as they used for the Woodfin apartments.
We truly can end homelessness in Buncombe County if we all come together as a community and come together as homeless service providers.